ก่อนที่เรานั้นจะมาฟังหัวข้อแรกว่าเรานั้นจะปรับและเปลี่ยนแปลงการศึกษาให้สอดคล้องกับศตวรรษที่ 21 ได้อย่างไรนะคะดิฉันขออนุญาตเรียนแจ้งทุกท่านอีกครั้งหนึ่งนะคะว่าในช่วงระหว่างการบรรยายขอความร่วมมือจากทุกท่านในการเปลี่ยนระบบโทรศัพท์มือถือของท่านให้อยู่ในระบบสั่นหรือระบบไร้เสียงนะคะเพื่อไม่ให้เป็นการรบกวนวิทยากรขณะบรรยายและไม่ให้เป็นการรบกวนสมาธิของผู้เข้าร่วมสัมมนาท่านอื่นด้วยนะคะ May I remind you once again to change your mobile phones into silent or vibration mode to avoid interrupting the speakers and the attention of the audience. Thank you very much. และก่อนที่เรานั้นจะไปฟังวิทยากรท่านนี้ท่านมีประวัติที่ต้องไม่เล่าไม่ได้แล้วน่าสนใจมากนะคะคุณเอียนจูคส์นะคะเป็นนักการศึกษาที่มีความสนใจอย่างแรงกล้าในเรื่องของการปรับโครงสร้างสถาบันการศึกษาเพื่อให้เกิดความเกี่ยวโยงนะคะในความต้องการของเด็กๆทั้งในปัจจุบันและในอนาคตคุณเอียนเนี่ยเขามุ่งมั่นที่จะให้เด็กๆนั้นนะคะพร้อมนะคะแล้วก็มีความพร้อมที่เหมาะสมสำหรับโลกอนาคตตลอดระยะเวลากว่า10ปีนะคะคุณเอียนจูคส์ได้มีการเดินทางไปบรรยายทั่วโลกกว่า40ประเทศโดยเฉลี่ยในแต่ละปีนะคะมีบุคคลที่เข้าฟังการบรรยายของคุณเอียนเนี่ยประมาณปีละ300,000 ถึง 350,000 คนนะคะคุณเอียนจูคส์เขียนหนังสือมาแล้ว12เล่มหนังสือชุดด้านการศึกษานะคะ9เรื่องและมีบทความตีพิมพ์ลงวารสารมากกว่า100ชิ้นนะคะในท้ายของการบรรยายของคุณเอียนเนี่ยเราจะเปิดโอกาสให้ทุกท่านนั้นได้มีการซักถามหัวข้อที่ทุกท่านนั้นสงสัยหรือว่าสนใจท่านสามารถที่จะถามโดยใช้ไมโครโฟนก็ได้หรือเขียนมาก็ได้ภาษาอะไรก็ได้ภาษาไทยหรืออังกฤษก็ได้เรามีล่ามแปลให้นะคะในโอกาสนี้นะคะเราจะมาเข้าสู่หัวข้อแรกของวันนี้กันค่ะ Understanding the digital generation strategies for teaching digital learners in today's classroom. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mr. Ian Jukes.
After that video, I have nothing to say. Thank you very much for coming. I'm leaving here. Can we bring the lights down a little bit so that people can see this screen in the middle? That would be absolutely fantastic. I need to warn you right off the top that I have a cast on my right leg. Okay, I also have a cast on my left leg. So I may have to sit down a little bit, not because I'm lazy, but because I'm old, okay? So what I want to do in this presentation is I want to talk about change. I want to talk about change in our world. I want to talk about change in our families. And particularly, I want to talk about change in our children. We face a world on the move. We live in a world that is changing profoundly and fundamentally. We live in a world that has not only changed, but it continues to change in incomprehensible, accelerating ways. And because of these changes, we face a fundamentally different kind of student, a student whose experiences, whose expectations, whose assumptions about the world that they live in are already, whether we like it or not, forcing us to fundamentally rethink teaching and learning and assessment of that learning. So what I want to do is I want to talk about change and its consequences for students. I want to talk about change and its consequences for education. I want to talk about change and what I describe as the new digital landscape that we all live in today. This right here is a recent book that I wrote called Understanding the Digital Generation. This book right here is based on more than 1,000 interviews with children between the ages of 5 and 25 years old. And what this book, and many, many more books just like it, and what a great deal of academic research is telling us is this, that as parents, as citizens, and particularly as educators, what we have to understand is that while on the outside, students today pretty much look the same as we did when we were growing up, that this ignores the fact that on the inside, that neurologically, that today's digital generations are completely different than previous generations. And it's not just because of the fact that children today mature many years earlier than students did even 15 years ago. It's not just because of the clothes they choose to wear, the clothes they choose not to wear. It's not just because they might want to dye their hair or style it differently than we did. it's not just because of the music they listen to or the way they talk or what they say or how they act. No, what I'm talking about in this presentation, what I talked about in that book, is that because of what I call digital bombardment, because of their pervasive exposure to digital technology and the digital world, the new digital landscape, by the way, exposure that primarily happens outside of school, that this digital bombardment is literally wiring and rewiring kids' brains on an ongoing basis. And as I'm going to show you in a few minutes, in particular, it's enhancing their visual memory, their visual processing, their visual learning skills. And what researchers are now beginning to conclude is that our students, our children, the ones who on the outside pretty much look the same as we did when we were growing up, that internally, that neurologically, they are processing information very differently than we do. And you see, this is a great challenge for the people in this room. This is a great challenge for the nation of Thailand. See, the great challenge that we face is that the older generations, the people here in this room right now, we are having real trouble identifying with them and identifying and understanding their world, because almost none of the things that we had when we were growing up are the experiences that these kids are having in their lives today. Now, there's so much I could say right here. I don't need anybody here to just talk and talk and talk about this stuff. There's a great deal of research and there's a great deal of science behind everything that I've said and I'm about to say, but I got very limited time here. And what I'm going to say is, in the handout that you've got in the program, I've provided way more background and details than I can in this presentation. But basically what I want to do here is I want to get to the matter at hand. And what I'm going to say is this: based on the research, based on the interviews, based on my reading, based on my experience, here's a brief summary of what we understand about the attributes of the digital generations. So what I'm going to first do is I'm going to try and summarize what we know about digital learners, their learning styles and their learning preferences, the way they like to learn. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare those to the traditional teaching styles and teaching preferences that continue to be used by many teachers in many classrooms today here in Thailand. And then what I'll do is I'll briefly discuss what these differences mean in terms of teaching and learning and assessment of that learning. And then this afternoon, in my second keynote, I'll discuss some of the very specific strategies that we can use to interest and engage the digital generations. Now, the first thing you have to understand is that digital learners prefer processing pictures, sound, color, and video before they process text. Meanwhile, and it's completely understandable because of their experiences growing up, many educators prefer to provide text before pictures, color, sound, and video. Now let me try and explain what I'm talking about here. You see, for generations, graphics were generally static illustrations. They were photos, they were diagrams, and what they did was they accompanied the text and they provided some kind of clarification for the text. I think most people in this room remember reading paper-based books when we were children. You see, back then, the primary information was provided by the text, and the images were merely intended to complement the text. What we've discovered from the research is, for the digital generation, the relationship is almost completely reversed. And the role of text is to provide more detail for something that they first experience as an image or a video. And research has demonstrated categorically, listen to this is unbelievable, that children can remember the content of more than 2,500 pictures with at least 90% accuracy 72 hours after exposure to those images, even though they only see each image for about 10 seconds. Let me just repeat what I just said. There's a more than a 90% recall of the content of 2,500 images 72 hours after exposure, even though they're only exposed to each image for about 10 seconds. Now, recall rates 1 year later of those same 2,500 pictures is still an impressive 63% of the content of those 2,500 pictures. But the same research says that when new information is presented orally with no image present, for example, if I made this presentation that I'm making to you right now, but I didn't include the visual element that you see on the screen right here, that 72 hours later, the students would only be able to recall about 10% of what was presented to them 72 hours previously. After just 72 hours, students are only going to remember 10% of the content of a lecture. And I think this is absolutely clear evidence that the traditional model, where the teacher stands at the front of the room and talks to and at the students, is just not an effective way to teach children today. However, and this is very significant, the percentage of information that's retained by the students goes up from 10% to almost 65% if an image is added to the content after the fact, including color visuals in notes and presentations. By research, increases the willingness to read by 80%. And a recent study has shown that 50% of audiences are persuaded by purely verbal presentations, where the presenter just talked at them. But more than 67% of the audience were persuaded by the same verbal presentation that had accompanying visuals like I'm accompanying my presentation right now. Now let me try and explain what's going on here, because this is huge for education. Since childhood, the digital generation has been continuously exposed to and bombarded by television, by videos, by computer games that all put colorful, high quality, highly expressive, realistic graphics that put multisensory experiences, sight, sound, touch, maybe soon even things like smell and taste and 3D, they put them in front of the student with little or no accompanying text. And as a result, to our students, images and video are powerful enough on their own to communicate the message to and for them. And increasingly for this generation, you might not like it, but increasingly for this generation, the role of words is simply to complement what they see in the images. Now we have to keep in mind that this generation that we're working with, this is the first generation in Thai history that actually knows more about a new innovation that is central to the Thai society than the older generations do. And as a result of this pervasive, this extensive, this chronic digital bombardment, what it has done is it's considerably sharpened the digital generation's visual abilities. They are a highly visually literate group. They are very comfortable with digital technology. In fact, they're so comfortable that they see it as a natural part of their digital landscape. They're completely comfortable seeing and conveying information in visual formats. And because they were born digital, right before our very eyes, our children have taken control of critical elements of the communications revolution. All you have to do is play a video game against a kid and get completely crushed in order to realize that their visual spatial skills are so highly developed that the research seems to indicate that these kids are cultivating a complete physical interface with digital and virtual worlds. You see, while that's happening, many people from our generations, many people in this room, continue to understand this because that's not the world we grew up in. That's not the world we come from. The people in this room, including me, we were all paper trained. We were trained to communicate primarily with words. We were trained to learn and read linear, logical, left to right, top to bottom, beginning to end. Meanwhile, the digital generations are light and sound trained. It is a completely different cognitive process. Okay, so these kids, as a result of this, are not just consuming content, but at the same time, they're creating content. They are what we call transliterate. They are fully fluent in a wide range of media. And you see, because they're transliterate, The digital generation finds it far more natural, they're far more comfortable communicating in the beginning with visuals, and then what they do is they mix in text and color and sound and graphics in richly meaningful and creative ways. Look, I could go on, and I usually do, okay? But what you need to take away from this trend that I've just shown you is that this digital age that we live in right now is driving a clear, and I believe, probably an irreversible shift from written media to visual media. So increasingly, for the digital generations, expressing ideas is just as likely to involve them creating a simulation or filming a video as it is them writing an expository essay, because they are so comfortable with their technologies. The digital generation is going to need to be able to communicate as effectively in graphical storytelling modes as we were taught to communicate with text and words when we were growing up. So, here's the question, and I need you to turn and talk to the people next to you. How should the research on the impact of learning, of incorporating visual information, guide your instruction in the classroom? So what I want you to do is, I want you to take 3 minutes, and I want you to turn to the people next to you, and I want you to try and summarize for them what I've said and what implications that has for teaching and learning and assessment in the classroom. Would you turn and talk? You've got 3 minutes. Away you go. Come on, talk. Let's go. Jeez. Everybody. Jeez. You have 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Talk. One minute. Okay, come back to me, please. So, if we know that, what are some strategies that work? All right. First thing, whenever possible, use video and image sources in student learning materials and lessons and presentations. Try to combine images with text. Wherever possible, try to use more images and less text. And remember as well that different colors appeal to visual learners. Red projects a feeling of strength, passion, and excitement. However, students often negatively associate the red color with death and failure. Psychologically, the color yellow evokes intellect, joy, energy, fun, happiness. It attracts attention. Blue tends to provoke feelings of loyalty, trust, and intelligence. And green is considered to be the easiest color for human vision, and it's often associated with freshness, with growth, and safety. So a really good practice for you as classroom teachers is to really carefully consider the color choices that you use when you're making presentations, when you're designing learning materials, when you're creating displays, and when you're communicating with your students. It's critical not to underestimate the power of visuals and the power of color to inspire and engage our visual learners. So the first one that I brought up here is that digital learners prefer processing pictures, sound, color, and video before they process text. That's the first one. The second one is that digital learners unconsciously read text on a page or on a screen in what's called an F or fast pattern. Meanwhile, most educators have been conditioned to unconsciously read that very same text in a Z pattern. Now, I'll explain that, but let me first give you some background. You see, images have the ability to quickly portray meaning, and that's because it only takes 150 milliseconds for the brain to process images, and it only takes 100 milliseconds more for our brain to attach meaning to those images. And that's because the eye processes and interprets the content of photographs 60,000 times faster than the eye processes and interprets the content of text and words. So that's why infographics are so popular. Infographics are really easy to digest. They're really engaging. You see, 70% of our body sensors are in our eyes, and 80% of our information comes to our brain through our eyes. Every single second, our eyes take in 72 gigabytes of information. In fact, what it turns out is our eyes are the world's greatest camera, okay? And what we can take away from this is that the brain is far more designed for processing visual information than anything else, which explains why we are all, everybody in this room, we are at our core inherently visual learners. So it's completely natural that today's students might be far more inclined towards the visual processing information than the text processing information. Why? Because their brains are designed that way. Now, here's where it gets quite weird. Because of digital bombardment, what we have discovered is that digital readers' eyes move in a very different way than traditional readers' eyes move when it comes to scanning a page, reading materials, and searching for specific information on that page. It turns out that the eyes of traditional readers like you and I, we unconsciously find an intersection approximately 1/3 of the page down and 1/3 of the page in from the side. The Greeks, 2,300 years ago, called this intersection the golden mean. And then what we start to do is we start reading for information on that page in what's called a Z curve or a Z pattern. We use a simple Z curve if there's only a small amount of information on the page, and we use a complex Z curve or what's called a zigzag pattern that involves a series of Z movements if there's lots of information on the page. Okay? The zigzag pattern is how older generations naturally, unconsciously try to read large blocks of text. However, completely new research from Kent State University in the United States has discovered that digital readers don't do that. They don't read the page the way that the older generations do. What happens with them is their eyes first unconsciously skim the bottom of the page and then the sides of the page before they start scanning the actual page itself for information in what's called an F or a fast pattern. Now, this F pattern reading has 3 components to it. Users first read in a horizontal movement, usually across the upper part of the content. This area forms the top of the F bar, okay? Next, users move down the page a little bit and they read across in a second horizontal movement that typically covers a shorter area than the first movement does, okay? Finally, the users scan the contents on the left side of the vertical movement. Sometimes this is fairly slow and a systematic scan, but as you see right here, as they move down the page, they read less and less of the page, okay? So, although the F pattern is not perfectly shaped here, sometimes it looks like an E, sometimes it looks like an L, The general shape generally resembles a capital letter F. Now, what you're about to see are a series of thermographic prints that were developed at Kent State University. Researchers there used a heat map to track the eye movement of readers in different digital and non-digital reading configurations, and then they summarized the results. Now, when you're looking at and when you're interpreting these maps, what you have to understand is that the brighter the color, the more the reader is focused on the information in that area of the page. And conversely, the darker the area, the less the reader is focused on that area of the page. As you can see here clearly, digital readers typically read in an F or fast pattern, and here's the scary part. They will unconsciously ignore the right side and the bottom half of the page. Statistically, they will only read about 28% of the words on the page, and it turns out they'll only go to the right side and the bottom half of the page if and only if they are highly motivated to do so. And what you can do is you can literally draw a diagonal line from the upper right-hand corner to the lower left-hand corner of the page, and unless you can find a way to attract and engage them, their eyes will never go below that line. Now, the preliminary conclusion here is that this F pattern in some way mimics the way that digital readers play video games and surf the web, scanning the screen for information. And this F pattern right here suggests that readers won't read your text thoroughly in a word-by-word manner. Exhaustive reading is really rare, so the most important information that you have on a page should be at the very top of the design in the first paragraphs where it will generally be read. And lesser information should be put on the left-hand side of the page, okay, in bullet points where the most important words are put at the beginning of the bullet rather than at the end of the bullet. Does this make sense? Yes or no? So, here's the question you need to ask. What implications does F-pattern reading hold for designing engaging reading materials that will compel readers to read the entire page for information, not just above that diagonal line from the upper right-hand corner to the lower left-hand corner? Turn to the people next to you, summarize what I just told you, and try to answer that question. And good luck with that. Way you go. Everybody. Two minutes. Okay, come back to me. You are one of the most polite audiences I've ever heard in my entire life. Now, if you don't start talking more, I'm going to come down there and I'm going to get you. You understand what I'm talking about? So, what is a strategy that works to get kids to read the entire page? How many of you have ever been walking in downtown Bangkok and seen somebody do this? What do you do automatically? What do? You look up. It's an actual brain syndrome. It's called apparent motion. And what your eyes will do is not look at the person who is looking. You will follow the motion of their eyes. And so, for example, in advertisements, what people who put advertisements together will do is they will put somebody on the page on a skateboard doing this, or throwing a ball like this, or being a kickboxer kicking like that. And what they're asking you to do is not to look at the person, but follow the apparent motion of that person to what they want you to see on the page. Does that make sense what I'm saying here? Yes, no? So, what you do is identify your most important piece of information on the page, and then use a visual, preferably a photograph and a PDF file, and shift the image so that the apparent motion of that image is taking the reader to the most important piece on the page. Yes? Here's the second thing. We have a lazy eye, which means our eye will look at a page of information and go, oh, that's just too much work. So what happens is, when you put lines across a page, what the reader will do is they will take their eye and they will move it down the page, and they will get to the line, and what do you think will happen? Bounce, 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 and they go off the page and they won't come back there again. Does that make sense what I'm saying? The third thing is, and I forgot to mention this before, with apparent motion, the motion of your image has to be into the page, not off the page. Because if the apparent motion is off the page, just like a line, they will come down, their eye will capture the image right here, and then their eye will follow the motion off the page, and they won't read anything more. Turn to the person next to you, take 1 minute to summarize the 3 strategies that I just told you that you can use on a page. Go, you got 1 minute. Where you go? Everybody. Thirty seconds. Okay, and start to come back to me again, please. I hate to interrupt you, because the most important things that happen are not what I say to you, but what you say to one another, because together you are stronger. So what's the third one here? Okay, so the second one was that digital readers read in an F pattern, not in a Z pattern. The next one is that digital learners not only prefer, but they are simultaneously looking for both instant gratification and immediate rewards, as well as at the same time, they're looking for deferred gratification and delayed rewards. Many educators prefer deferred gratification and delayed rewards. Why? Because that was their experience when they were students. Now let me explain why I'm saying 2 things at the same time. Deferred gratification and delayed rewards say this, that if you study hard, and if you keep focused, and if you behave, and if you attend classroom on a regular basis, eventually you're going to be rewarded with a good letter grade, with acceptance to a good school, or you're going to get a chance at a good job. And I will be the first to say that it's absolutely essential for students to have this kind of focus and discipline. But at the very same time, you have to understand that these students are different. They're neurologically different, and you have to understand why digital culture resonates so strongly inside this generation. Here's why. Because digital culture provides them with exactly what they need and they want the most. Now, I think back to when I was a child, back in the Stone Ages, when I was growing up. There I was at 11 years old. And I remember being terribly insecure. I suspect that many of us were also insecure. And you see, because we were insecure, what we were always looking for was for affirmation. We were looking for lots of attention, and we wanted to be able to distinguish ourselves from other people. And we got that attention through academics or athletics or music or social skills. That was our way of belonging to a group. It's absolutely no different for today's digital generation. They also want constant affirmation. They want lots of attention. And they need to be able to distinguish themselves from others. But you see, for them, in addition to academics and sports and music and social skills, the digital generation have embraced social media and social media tools as their own. Here's why. You see, things like smartphones and digital technology and social media tools and video games all tell the user this, that if they put in the hours and if they master the game or if they master the tool, they're going to be rewarded. They're going to be rewarded with the next level. They're going to be rewarded with a win. They're going to be rewarded with a place on the high scores list, or they're going to develop a skill that is going to be respected by their friends and peers. And you see, what they do determines exactly what they get, and what they get is obviously worth the hundreds and hundreds of hours of effort they have to put in to develop those skills. Now, what I just described, that's deferred gratification. That's delayed rewards. And you see, new technologies excel at giving deferred gratification and delayed rewards. But in the very same time, video games and digital technology also give students immediate feedback for their efforts, and they quench their constant thirst for instant gratification. And the payoff for any action is usually extremely clear. I'll give you an example. This is my 30-year-old son, Colby. Colby is an internationally renowned. He is a rock star 3D artist. What he does is he specializes in character and creature creation for video games. He is hot. He is incredibly in demand. Until recently, he worked for EA Sports, and he was one of the lead artists in the creation and the development of a game called Mass Effect 2, which is one of the world's most popular video games. But recently, he was recruited by Microsoft for $500,000 US to move from Montreal to Seattle and become the lead artist in their most popular video game, which is called Halo. Now, recently I had dinner with Colby and his wife and a very famous president of a very successful video game company. I want you to know, Colby paid for dinner. You understand that, okay? And the president told me, the president of this video game company told me that when they create new video games, they intentionally design those video games to require the players to make choices and act on them up to 6 times a second, and they ensure that the players are rewarded or punished for the decisions they make every 7 to 10 seconds. Do you understand what that is? That's instant gratification. That's immediate, that's instant reward. But then, this man pulled out his laptop and he showed me the data that compared how often digital learners are rewarded for playing their games and how often students are rewarded or asked to make decisions for themselves or are positively rewarded for their actions in the classroom. And according to his research, on average, students get to ask a question, make a personal decision, or get positively reinforced for their actions in the classroom about once every 35 minutes, which might partially explain why there are so many students in our classrooms today who are waiting for the video game version of school to go on sale so they don't have to attend our classrooms anymore. So here's the question. How can we incorporate both immediate gratification and instant rewards, as well as deferred gratification and delayed rewards, into our classroom experiences? So once again, everybody, turn and talk to the person next to you, summarize what I've just put out in that last 8 minutes, and try to answer this question. Good luck, get to work. Way you go. Everybody. One minute. Okay, and start to come back to me, please. Come back here. So, what are simple strategies that will work here? Almost every teacher today has a cell phone. A cell phone most of the time with a camera and even sometimes a video camera on it. So, what happens is when you are looking at students' work, use the video camera on your cell phone to share information related to student progress and performance. Use the cell phone video camera to make video comments about the work that the students have done so that the students can quickly get meaningful feedback on their work rather than having to wait for extended periods of time to have the comments come back to them in written form. Here's the next thing you can do. Use music and sound in the classroom to cue the students and as an incentive for students during classwork. Use music as a reward for beginning and maintaining workflow in the classroom. The research shows categorically that students who listen to music complete the tasks more quickly and more effectively. They come up with better ideas than those who don't because the music has improved their mood, okay? Now, in addition to that, when students are forced to sit idly for long periods of time, as they have to do when the teacher talks to them, like I'm talking to you, they get restless. Students have to be mentally and physically invested during the learning process. So what you need to do is you need to incorporate brief movement exercises in class in order to channel the students' energy. The research shows that students will pay attention, they will stay on task longer, and they will feel far more engaged. Why? Because they prefer to be moving, not always be trapped in their seats. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Play music in the classroom. Get them to stand up and run on the spot or leap or whatever. Make them do counting games while they're moving around in the classroom. So, number 3, digital learners are looking for both instant gratification and immediate rewards, as well as deferred gratification and delayed rewards. For the purpose of this presentation, the last one is that digital learners, this is really amazing, prefer learning that is simultaneously relevant, active, instantly useful, and fun. Can you imagine learning being fun? Isn't that disgusting? You see, the thing is, many educators still feel compelled to teach memorization of the traditional content-based material that's set in the curriculum guide in order to prepare the students for the tests that those students are regularly going to have to face. And I believe that this is happening at the expense of cultivating the higher order thinking skills, the new and different 21st century learning skills that every one of these students is going to need once they leave the school. Now, the digital generation gets criticized all the time. They get derided. They get misunderstood. They get misrepresented. They get disrespected in the press. And the digital generation are often accused of being lazy, of being antisocial beings who lack even the most basic social skills. And I will tell you this, both the research and my personal experience says that on the contrary, for the vast majority of the digital generation, the digital world that they live in is far from an isolating experience. The digital generation is constantly in contact with one another. They're texting, they're tweeting, they're talking. In fact, it turns out the digital generation is a highly social generation. Here's the difference. They're just not social the way that we think of social. They live at least part of their times in digital worlds that they've created for themselves. They play hundreds of different video games. These video games are exciting and engaging. And they use digital tools to constantly stay connected to all their friends. And you see, here's what you need to understand. In these virtual worlds, they create and they control everything. They're users. They're active. There's excitement. There's novelty. There's risk. There's the company of friends. It's somewhere that they can go for advice and information. They observe. They inquire. They participate. They discuss. They argue. They play. They critique. And they investigate. Because digital technologies engage students in ways that are relevant to their lives, allowing them to learn by doing as they experiment with new social and cultural worlds. And as a result of that, it should be no surprise that they become easily frustrated because many of them have a digital life outside of school and a non-digital life inside of school. And you see, increasingly, this generation won't accept that. Increasingly, this generation expects. No, they don't just expect. In fact, they demand to be able to be in control at least part of the time. The problem is that what they expect and what they experience in their world outside of school with their games and their texting and their websites is often completely at odds with what they experience in the classroom. So what happens is, after these students have spent hundreds of hours of their lives outside of school, wandering around in virtual environments, playing video games, texting and communicating around the planet, they come to school where almost everything is controlled by teachers, and they're compelled to sit in their seat, to sit in classrooms where the teacher stands at the front of the room talking at them nonstop without even showing them nice pictures. And you know what they tell me? It's boring. They control nothing. They have to sit there passively and listen. Heed what I'm about to say. I can absolutely guarantee you that it is not going to be possible for very much longer to engage young people in an educational system where the quality of the experiences the school provides aren't as inviting and exciting and engaging as the quality of the experiences these kids can find outside of school. You're not going to like what I'm just about to say, but for education as we know it to survive here in Thailand, learning needs to become as engaging and fun as video games are for these kids today. The classroom, as it currently works, is just not enough for them. Our challenge is not for them to keep up with us, but for us to keep up with them. The digital generation will never, ever, ever accept the traditional model where the teacher stands at the front of the room and talks all the time. They need to be in a situation where they are controlling things, and that can never happen in the current school environment. Why is it? Think about this. Why is it that our students can solve the most complex problems in a video game, yet we believe they're not able to add or read or write? Because you see, even though we may not realize this, students today, the kids that you are working with today, are very much an intellectual, they are a problem-solving, they are a highly social generation. These kids have highly developed critical thinking, problem-solving, and social skills. Here's the problem. The problem is that their social skills and their problem-solving skills are just not the skills that our generations value, nor are these the skills that we generally test for in schools today. And so what happens is, and this is a tragedy, their extraordinary cognitive and technical abilities are simply not acknowledged or dismissed. Now, there are some people in this country, there are some people in this world who tell us that the experiences that the digital generation are having and the skills they're developing, you know what? They're worthless. They're time wasting. They're irrelevant. That play and games are simply preparation for work and life after school. Now, it's taken me years to understand this, but what I now realize is that for today's digital generations, play is work. And work is increasingly seen in terms of games and gameplay. That's why the digital generation want their learning to be relevant, instantly useful, and fun, and more than anything else, when it comes to learning, the digital generation wants the answer to one simple question. Why in the world am I learning this? And what possible connection does this stuff have to me and my world? And for the digital generation, the answer they're not looking for is because it might be on the test, or it might be needed to pass the course. That's just not reason enough for them. Because of digital bombardment, the younger generation's brains have been completely saturated with information and digital technology. And as a result of that, their brains are physically, measurably different than ours. And because their brains are physically, measurably different than ours, they think differently. And they process information differently. And they use different parts of the brain differently than people of our generations do. And it doesn't stop there. People 2, 3, 4 years apart in age are having completely different experiences with the technology that they're using. And what we're seeing here, and this is very scary, we're beginning to see an accelerated gap between the brains of the younger generations, between the brains of screenagers and tweenagers and younger children. It's an everyday part of their lives. I mean, really, has it come to this right here? And is this a photo of the next generation right here? Do you understand that the digital generation learned to type before they learned to print and write? And they use a keyboard better than they use a pen. Anyone who has seen a 2-year-old playing around with an iPad knows exactly what I'm talking about. And you see, they were born into this world. There's never been a time when this stuff hasn't existed. And remember this, for them, for those young kids today, a smartphone or an iPad is the most primitive technology they will ever experience in their lifetime. Now, there's lots more that I could say, but I don't have the time to do it. I'm hoping that this brief presentation explains, at least in part, why kids act differently, why they behave the way they do, why they respond to the world the way they do, on the way that they learn, on how they view the world, on what interests them and engages them. And I hope my presentation this morning explains, at least in part, some of the fundamental differences between their generations and our generations. And you know what? This is what frustrates me more than anything else. We have more than 40 years of research on what really works in the classroom and what really doesn't work in the classroom. And the crazy part is almost nothing of what we have learned about how our children's brains and minds function is being applied in the classroom today. New technology has changed everything. And I'm sorry if I sound a little bit disrespectful, because it's not intended that way, but very few people in this room right here really understand what I'm saying. Because there are very few people in this room that are under the age of 25 years old. So I just got to ask this question. Listen to this question. If kids are way ahead of teachers in developing the skills needed to be successful in the digital world of the future, and if many teachers are oblivious to the significance of these skills that kids have acquired in this digital world, and if teachers continue to do things in the classroom that we already know don't work because they do, then who here really has the learning problem? Is it us or is it the kids? I think that there is great irony in the fact that there are many experienced teachers in this country today that are struggling trying to become learners in the new digital landscape. It's a great challenge unlearning what it means to be a traditional teacher, and that is what this conference is about. What's the definition of insanity? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing you've always done, but expecting or wanting or needing completely different results. And if we continue to do what we have always done, we're going to continue to get what we've always got, and in doing so, we will fail our students and we will fail this nation. Now, I want to finish this presentation with a short video to test your level of readiness for change. Are you ready? Okay, here's the video. Here's what it looks like. Now, if you have seen this video before, shut up. Don't say anything. Don't blurt out the answer. How many people think they've seen this video before? Great. Okay, let me set the scene here. There are 6 students. 3 students are wearing white t-shirts. 3 students are wearing black t-shirts. Each group of students has a basketball. And when I click go, they're going to be passing the basketball back and forth. Now, your task, and it's a tough task, is going to be to count the number of passes made in 30 seconds between the white-shirted students. Now, they're going to be moving around fairly quickly, so it's going to be kind of complex. So that's why I'm trying to show you this in advance. So what I want you to do, again, is to count the number of passes made by the white-shirted students in 30 seconds. Does not matter whether it's a back pass, whether it's an overhead pass, whether it's a bounce pass. It has to be a completed pass. Got it? Now, it turns out there's a very significant gender difference between men and women when it comes to this kind of attention to detail, when there's lots of action going on. How many of you in the room think that women are better at this task? Hands up. Oh, come on, women, put your hands up for crying out loud. How many people think that men are better at this pass? Okay, here we go. Are you ready? So, the number of passes made in 30 seconds between the white-shirted students. Are you ready? Get ready to focus. Set. Go. Okay, call out a number. All right, I heard 15. How many of you got 15? Hands up. Okay, hands up, let's see. Okay, another number. How many got 16? Hands up. Hands up, come on. Another number. So I had somebody the other day give me 82. Now, here's the question. Without blurting the answer out, did anyone see anything unusual happen on the screen? Hands up. Okay, a few of you, that's about right. These are usually the people that don't pay attention to my instructions, but that's okay. So, I'll give you a hint what some of you missed. There's the hint right there. Now, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to show you maybe we can dim the lights down a little bit more so they can see this a little better, just for this. I'm going to show you the very same video again. Do not come up to me afterwards and accuse me of swapping the videos, because I didn't. This time, don't count the number of passes. See if you notice anything different happen on the screen. Are you ready? Set. Go. Dim them right down. Don't count, just watch. Just watch. All right, I have a question for you. How could you possibly not see a 2-meter guy in an ape suit come walking across the screen, turn in front of you, wave at you, and then walk off the other screen? I mean, come on! How many of you still don't know what I'm talking about? How many of you saw it that time? Hands up. How many? Come on, hands up. How many of you saw it that time? How many of you still don't know what the heck I'm talking about here? All right, here's the thing though. Some of you feel really smug because you saw it the second time. Here's the thing though. There wasn't one thing that happened. There were 3 things that happened. So I'm going to give you one last chance. I'm going to show you the video again. We're going to dim the lights down again. This time, when you see things unusual happening, call them out. Do you hear me say that again? Call them out, not whisper them out. Call them out. Are you ready? Are you sure you're ready? Are you ready? Yes. One more time. Are you ready? Yes. Here we go. Okay, watch this girl right here. Watch her come across the screen. Watch what's going to happen now. Here goes 1, 2. 1, 2. Watch the curtain behind. Number 1, the girl steps off. Number 2, the ape steps on. Number 3, the curtain at the back changes from being red to being orange. Now, let me explain what just happened and why it's so important to what I was talking about here today. This video, which you can find on YouTube, is called The Invisible Gorilla, and it's based on research by a fellow by the name of Dan Simon from the University of Illinois in the United States. And what just happened to almost everybody in this room is called perceptual blindness. Now, perceptual blindness happens when you miss something really obvious on the page, like a 2-meter guy in an ape suit come walking across the screen, turn, and beat its chest. Now, here's what happened. Cognitively, I primed you, I prepared you by asking you to look for something specific. I gave you a specific task. I asked you to count the number of passes made by the white-shirted students in 30 seconds. Then, at the very last minute, and this was intentional, I upped the ante seriously by telling you that there was a gender difference between men and women, which of course there isn't. I lied. And when I did that, I created a huge problem in your brain. Listen very carefully. If your brain sees something and it doesn't understand it, if your brain doesn't have a specific frame of reference for something, it's more than just confusing to the brain. The brain is actually conditioned to refuse to see it. In other words, if you're not expecting to see something on the screen, like a 2-meter guy in an ape suit come across the screen, then our brain is absolutely conditioned so that we don't see it. And that is the story of this presentation. That is the story of this conference. This conference is about learners who look at the world differently than we do. So let me ask you some personal questions about your life. How many important things are going on in your life? How many important things are going on with your partners? How many important things are going on with your children? How many important things are going on with your family? How many important things are going on with your friends that you're just not seeing because you're just not paying attention for them? And in the very same way, listen carefully, how many important things are going on in your classrooms? How many important things are going on with your students that you are missing because you're focused elsewhere? Because you're focused on the short term, because you're focused on the curriculum, because you're focused on getting kids ready for the next topic, for the next term, for the next test, for the next level of education. Because if you can't see a 2-meter gorilla walk across the screen, turn, and beat its chest, then you better ask yourself a question at the beginning of this conference. What else are you missing in your students' lives because you're just not looking for it? And that's what I need you to leave this presentation with. So what I want you to do is this. Everybody, close your eyes. Close your eyes. And think about what you've seen here today. Think about what you've learned here today. Think about what's going on in your students' lives. Think what's going on in your professional lives. Think what's going on in your personal lives. Think about what's going on in the lives of those who are closest to you. All right, come back to me. Look up here. Wake up, wake up. All right, what have I tried to do to you in this presentation? It's represented by this rubber band right here. This is what I've tried to do to you in this presentation. I've tried to stretch your thinking, but I'm running into a problem. And that's because the rubber band is pulling back at me. And what's going to happen is, in a matter of seconds or minutes or hours, my arms are going to get so tired that I'm going to have to let go. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? The rubber band went right back to the way it was before, because a rubber band has a mindset. A rubber band has a perspective. A rubber band has a paradigm. A rubber band has a way to view the world, just like teachers have a mindset. Just like teachers have a paradigm. Just like teachers have a comfort zone that they've had for a long period of time. So here's the question. How do you get a rubber band to not only stretch, but stay stretched? Well, you wrap it around 2 anchors. You heat it. You freeze it. You apply a solvent to it and change the chemical composition. But the interesting thing is, even after all that time, even after all that effort, when you release the pressure, the rubber band is still going to want to try to go back to where it was before. Intellectually. You've heard me talk about the fact that kids are different, that they're neurologically different, that they see the world differently, that they interact with the world differently. And you nod your heads like this. But as the old saying goes, when the going gets tough, The tough get traditional. And what happens is, at an absolutely unconscious level, we can end up reverting right back to the way that things were before. Now, in this afternoon's presentation, I'm going to take it further than this. And I'm going to say, how do we have it all? How do we both prepare our students for the exams that they're going to have to write, and at the same time, how do we prepare them for the world that they're going to have to live in once they leave school? So I want to finish with one last activity. I want you to turn to the people next to you, and I want you to identify 3 things that you know now that you didn't know before you came into this presentation today. 3 things that you know now that you didn't know before you came into the presentation today, and why, as an educator or an educational leader, it's important you know them. Get to work now. All right, look up this way. Now, I got lots more to say. And unfortunately, you're going to have to listen to it. All right? You guys are so serious, I am telling you. I am going to be here the entire day. Feel absolutely free to come up to me anytime if I can answer any questions for you or send you in the direction of different resources. In the meantime, you've had enough of me. So go and have a tea break or coffee break or whatever it is we have here. Thank you very much for putting up with me. It's been a great honor to be here. Thank you.